He granted for the sake of argument that some unnatural monster had really existed, but reminded me that even the most morbid perversion of nature needed not be unnameable or scientifically indescribable. I admired his clearness and persistence, and added some further revelations I had collected among the old people. Those later spectral legends I made plain related to monstrous apparitions more frightful than anything organic could be, apparitions of gigantic bestial forms, sometimes visible and sometimes only tangible, which floated about on moonless nights and haunted the old house, the crypt behind it, in the grave, where a sapling had sprouted beside an illegible slab. Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads, where today we are doing Saturday Shorts, and my first short story is from none other than the master H.P. Lovecraft. I went with The Unnameable, which is, by the way, the second kind of tale in the Randolph Carter series. I'm very interested in this series, so I plan to do more in the series, so be on the lookout. But this was published in 1923. It's 6 pages in length. Obviously, we're talking Lovecraft, so we're talking cosmic horror. So let's dive right in and talk about a summary of this tale. This is the second, again, in the Randolph Carter series. Randolph Carter and his friend Joe Manton, who is actually a principal from East High School in Boston. They're sitting on a tomb of a 17th century house by or in a town called Arkham. Carter is an author and apparently wrote a tale called The Attic Window, which is based on an unearthed diary from around the beginning of the 1700s, where it talks about a tale of a boy who entered this abandoned house in the late 1700s, around 1793, and a thing with a blemished eye that you see at night came and surprised him, and it has kind of gathered this kind of Paul Bunyan-esque kind of story, and some say that they still to this day see it at that window. And so that's kind of the summary of this tale. What makes it really interesting is, it's a quick read. It has this growing sense of dread that only Lovecraft can create. His writing is just so whimsical, in the cadence I've kind of noticed as I get a little further into reading his tales is very purposeful. I think his cadence, his word choice, the way the sentences are structured are very intentional. I think when he's creating the setting and growing the dread, you have this kind of molasses, honey kind of feel to the word choice and the cadence of his words in a sentence. And then as the climax or the conflict comes to a head, you get a little more choppy in his word choice. Not that that's a bad thing, but it just gives this feel like you are kind of floating and watching this all unfold, which I think was the intent by Lovecraft in writing these tales. The locked attic door, they left when the abandoned house, when things happen in town. The two at the end up in a hospital and reflecting on what just happened. What was that thing that we saw? They can't describe it, hence the reason they call it The Unnameable. And it's a very interesting tale. In terms of rating and overall, I give it a 4.2. I think it's fantastic. I know that some believe and speculate, when I was doing a little research on this, that Lovecraft himself was writing Randolph Carter, as a character to kind of put himself into this kind of world that he was creating. They feel like that Carter is Lovecraft, and I thought that was an interesting kind of belief. I listened to this story and read it in the book and did it immersively. Again, Horror Babble on YouTube has this tale. The video is like 20 minutes, and I really enjoyed it. They do a great job of doing narration of these tales, and so I listened to it there and read it and followed along in the book. It was great. Lovecraft is one of the kind of the most handful of authors that I've come across that I really could take a hiatus from any other reading that I do here on the channel and just read for a couple months, just everything from him. And that's saying a lot because I really, really like his style. So that is my take on The Unnameable from H.P. Lovecraft. I give it a 4.2 out of 5.
2,000 years later.
And so for my second short story for this edition of Saturday Shorts, I went with Flannery O'Connor from this collection titled A Good Man is Hard to Find and Other Stories. I went with the story The River. Again, I listened to this one immersively. There is a couple people that have done narrations on YouTube of this one. This is 26 pages in length. It was published in 1953. I really enjoyed her title story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. I really thought that was really good. O'Connor is known for her kind of gothic kind of fiction and dread. And this one was an interesting one. So let's dive right in and talk about the summary. So in this particular story, we're talking about a young Harry Ashfield. He is taken by his babysitter, Mrs. Connon, and they go to kind of I would guess it is kind of Southern Baptist religious kind of at a river outside kind of gathering. And young Harry on the way overhears Miss Connon talk about with her other children that the Reverend is named Bevel, and when they go about asking Harry his name, he also mentions that his name is Bevel. But they take him to this river. He tells Miss Connon that he wants to get baptized in the river, and everything seems about it really good. He enjoys the preacher, and so he does so. And then when Miss Connon takes Harry back to his mother and father and the family, something happens with Harry, and I'm going to leave it at that. And so what makes this a really good short story is the revival, Harry meeting the preacher, Bevel Summers. I thought that was really interesting. He baptized him. He tells him he is now counted in the kingdom of Christ. And I liked how the preacher spoke kind of matter-of-factly. He speaks about the river as kind of a place of spiritual rebirth and a freedom from suffering. And I enjoyed kind of the authenticity of that character being created in kind of that Southern kind of feel to a preacher down south. I thought Harry is basically a neglected child, and so he's very open to influence of any nature, and I think O'Connor did a good job in creating that character that way. I think the parents are very dynamic in and of itself, that they're only kind of bookmarked in the story at the beginning and the end, and they're not nice people. They're neglective parents, but I think what she created with those parents really works well in this story. You get a feeling of being inspired by the baptism. Obviously he believes the river, Harry believes the river holds something greater, and it becomes a place of escape for him. And so what ends up transpiring is not surprising, but what the twist at the end is very much so. I don't have a particular excerpt here, but I do have a fun fact. When I was looking into this story, although it fits well kind of with the Easter theme a little bit, not in the sense of what takes place at the end, but there was a number of critics that have difficulty with the story because there's a great interpretation of the ending, and some people believe that it's intentional and the reason for the ending that it serves no purpose, and some believe that it does because it makes the reader read between the lines and draw their own conclusions. It's very interesting. O'Connor went on to say she was very careful to create a character whose youth places him below the age of accountability in the Catholic faith. And I will leave it at that. If you do your own research, you can kind of see kind of a little polarized, opinion of the ending of this story. In terms of rating and overall, I give it a 3.4. It wasn't my favorite. I liked the premise of it. I just didn't like the execution as much. I think it was a little soft-handed in parts. I thought some of the characters were really interesting, but I didn't think the execution, there wasn't enough meat in the premise to really make me feel like it was whole. I felt like The ending was very satisfying, and what, again, you had to read between the lines to kind of infer what the meaning is here. But I didn't think there was enough meat in the premise and the plot leading up to the kind of the ending conflict to really justify a really high score. So I gave it a 3.4. Again, I did like the ending. I will say that O'Connor's prose is very nice. It's nicely paced. It's quick. I enjoy her character work, and I enjoy, obviously, her creation of setting and dread. I thought it was really, really well done. And that's my take of Flannery O'Connor, The River. I give it a 3.4 out of 5. A man as big as himself was striding toward him over the sands, making no attempts at stealth, and the pirate's eyes widened as he stared at the close-fitting silk breeches, high-flaring top boots, wide-skirted coat, and headgear of 100 years ago. There was a broad cutlass in the stranger's hand and an unmistakable purpose in his approach. The pirate went pale as recognition blazed in his eyes. "You!" he said unbelievingly. "By Mitra, you!" And yes, my final and third entry for the Saturday Shorts is A Tale from Conan. This is kind of a novella versus a short story, but I went with The Black Stranger in this collection, The Conquering Sword of Conan, as I'm making my way through all of the different tales of Conan. I'm on my third and final kind of omnibus Del Rey edition, and so The Black Stranger was up, and it's about 70 pages in length. Its publication is set in the 1930s, and I've got some fun facts around that we'll get to in a minute. But let's talk about the summary of this. Conan is on the run from a group of kind of pickish warriors. He stumbles upon a hidden coastal stronghold that's occupied by rival pirate factions, and he stumbles upon a door. And at that point, the story kind of flips, and you get to meet some of these pirate noblemen and their plight, and you kind of find out in retrospect, what they're after, and then how Conan kind of comes in to this picture. These scheming noblemen and pirates, they have various kind of vices, and they're all vying after this treasure of Trinocus, and its dominance because the treasure is supposed to be beyond anything that is measurable. And Conan comes into the story as he must navigate a web of deceit and danger because he has the ability to lead these pirates and their ever-pressing wanting to conquer, and he has a way to ingratiate himself into this mix and watch his back because they are not noble men. And so that's kind of the summary of this. All the while, there is a strange apparition as well that's in the shadows and kind of overarching in this story, and it's very interestingly well done. And so let's talk about what makes this a really good short story. The pace is incredible. I thought it was really fast-paced. I really enjoyed Conan in this one because I think we got to see Conan probably in one of his better forms. I like Conan when there's fighting. I like Conan when he's overcoming odds and when he's down on his luck and then overwhelms his opposition. But in this one, we get to see him kind of using his mind, especially when he comes into the stronghold, meets with Strong. There's Valencio and Zenora. They are all kind of these nobleman leaders, all vying after power, and he outmaneuvers them in a way because he has something to offer, and he strikes a deal on how everyone can kind of agree to some regard because everyone has some kind of skin in the game or some kind of opposition that makes them see this through, so to speak, but everyone knows that they're going to stab each other in the back, even Conan. So I really enjoyed kind of Conan's mental. We get to see a little more. He's not just a brute, not just all muscle and no brains. We get to see a lot of his kind of cunning and conniving here. I really liked Valencio. I liked Tina and Belessa. These two, Tina was the younger child, Belessa was the niece of Valenzio. Obviously, I liked what ends up happening in the conflict and what ends up happening at the end of the story. Conan doesn't need treasure. All he needs is a boat and a crew, and the world is his. I thought that was fantastic. In terms of excerpts, obviously I read one at the beginning, but I do have another fun fact. When I was looking at the publication date of this story, The Black Stranger was one of Howard's works featuring sword and sorcery hero Conan, but it was said to be written in the 1930s, but not published in his lifetime. When the original Conan version of his story failed to find a publisher, Howard rewrote The Black Stranger into the pirate tale Terence Volmia. The story was titled Swords of the Red Brotherhood. The original version of the story was later rewritten by L. Sprague de Camp, and it was put into a different Conan story and published in Fantasy Magazine in February of 1953. It was retitled The Treasure of Trinikos for book publication later. And then when Del Rey picked up these omnibus collections and looked at Howard's works, then they went to the original title and put it in publication here in these omnibus collections. I thought that was really interesting. In terms of rating and overall, I give it a 4.4. There's really not a bad Conan tale when it all is said and done. This is a nice, refreshing one. It's a lengthier tale, more kind of a novella, and at 70 pages. And so you get a lot more. You get a little more character development. You get a little more plot lines, individual plot lines. So it was very nicely to see all these kind of threads come to fruition at the final conflict. I really, again, liked Howard's prose. It's like butter. It's butter that's organic, free range, AAA, because it just works so well. It reads so well for me. I don't know if it's just me, but I don't think that it is. It just is matter of fact. It keeps things moving. It just tells a tale kind of straightforward. There's not any fluff to it, and I really appreciate that. But again, if you have not had a chance to read any tales of Conan, I highly, highly recommend you go out and purchase these Del Rey omnibus collections out of Amazon for $15 or $16. You can't go wrong. You get a lot of Conan tales for that amount of money. It's a steal, in my opinion. So, and that, my friends, is my Saturday shorts for this week. I really enjoyed these. You can't go wrong when you're talking Howard and Lovecraft. And again, O'Connor writes a good short story. Even though this one, The River, wasn't my favorite, I really enjoyed getting a little deeper into her writing kind of chops. So I hope you enjoy this. Happy Saturday, happy Easter, and I will talk to you all in the next one. Thanks.